Released in 1980, this horror film directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Jack Nicholson is touted by some viewers as one of the greatest horror films of all time. Over the years, many have soured on it though, from the history of awful treatment of Shelley Duvall on set, and has become notoriously known to be hated by the author Stephen King, whose book of the same name it's been adapted from. Today, on You've Never Seen It, we're kicking off October by heading to the Overlook Hotel. That's right, we're talking The Shining. Welcome to You've Never Seen It, an audio podcast where I am on a mission to never hear those four words again. I'm your host, Allison Salamone, and joining me today is a horror stan, former Schmodown competitor Rick the Rager Radis, and you can find him as the host of Really Scared on What Real Entertainment, and of course an expert in all things The Shining. Good old Taylor Cleek is here with me today. What's up, Taylor?
Hello, ghouls and goblins. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited you're here.
You know, you mentioned Really Scared, which is a horror podcast I host intermittently, I would say. But for those who don't know the format of that show, we have guests on. They pick horror films that they're passionate about, and we just discuss them at length. I've been on record several times saying The Shining is my favorite horror movie, but we've never covered it. I was always waiting for somebody to pick that movie, and we never have. So this is going to be really cathartic, and I've brought a lot of notes because I called my own shot. I had to show up as a Shining scholar. So
you sure
ready.
Did.
Get comfortable.
We're strap in, folks. This one might be a marathon.
Yeah.
This is going to be so fun to edit. I can't wait.
I am notorious for being long-winded, so feel free to just cut me off anytime you want.
And you've that's The Shining. Have a good one.
Yeah, it might be necessary. I don't want to put you through the grief of this being your longest episode.
No, honestly, I haven't even recorded with PJ Campbell yet, but I'm assuming between this one and that one, I'll have like what there are some episodes where I'm like, I may not sound like it, but like I'm straining for our conversation and I'm trying to like get there because I'm sitting at like, oh, it's been at least 35 to 40 minutes. And I look at the little timer and it's like 15. And I'm like, fuck, like, how can I make this work? How can I make this movie sound even more interesting? Let's figure this out.
Yeah. Believe me, I came with plenty to say. And if it's a contest now, we can't let PJ win. I'm going to be the longest episode.
And I lose in the end either way. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, just kidding.
No matter happens, you lose.
Exactly. Kind of just how life is sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. Either way, I don't want to be either of them. So, well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. Before we even get into it, so we're talking about The Shining today, but before we even kind of get into it, let's get a little info from you and like your history with where you are with, you know, how you feel about movies and the type of watch you are, your favorite genres, and really, and then, you know, we'll close out this whole intro part with why The Shining? Why did we have to talk about this film?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely, if I was going to pick a kind of movie I like or a genre that I feel most comfortable in, I'm definitely the horror guy. You know, it's October right now, scary season. This is when I thrive. This is when the entire world is on the same page as me for 31 days, and it feels so nice. I love horror movies. Been that way pretty much since I was a kid. It was sort of a traumatic entrance into the genre, like most people experience. Staying up too late, seeing movies you shouldn't have, Nightmare on Elm Street, Candyman, those were big ones for me. Critters, I remember being scared by Critters as a child. And then it's like this weird, once you've done it though, once you've kind of peered over into the void a little bit, you keep going like, even though you felt terrible doing it, you're like, I kind of want to take another look. And it just became that continuous trip back to the well to see how much further we could go, how much scarier it could get. And, what kind of experience could I have with these movies. And so it's like that dragon I've been chasing my entire life. And The Shining, I would say, I'm very bad at quantifying favorite movies, best movies, stuff like that. I really struggle with that. I watch a lot of movies, and my answer can change with the season. But if I had to put a bullet on it, I would say The Shining is my favorite scary movie. And I think what the best part of it is I revisit this every year, usually every October, and I'm still always shaken by it. I'm still always on that ride again for the first time. And it is very difficult to watch, especially a scary movie, and feel like you're right back where you were when you came across it for the very first time, even though you know it's going to happen, you know what the ending is, but it doesn't matter because there's always something there that you engage with and that chills your spine and makes your blood run cold. And that is The Shining for me. Every year, I always come back to it and go, wow, this still works every single year. There is something just so inherently creepy and disturbing and exciting about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And that is what I picked here. Because, of course, I knew you were not a horror person.
I am not a horror person. And it's so funny you say that because, like, I've gotten better. I want to say, I really think, honestly, really within the past year and a half, I've gotten a lot better. And I think, and of course, a lot of it is due to my husband is a huge horror stan. Like, loves horror. We went to go see, I remember I texted your lovely partner, Jessica, and about Barbarian before going to see it. And she called me. She's like, you're going to die because I died. And then I'm like, cool, good to know. And then went to go see it. And I watched it with my hands over my eyes like this, like peeking out when I could, like leading in and hiding into Frank. And at one point, Frank just leaned over and he goes, just know that something's going to happen and you'll be fine. And I looked up at him, I go, that's why I'm about to throw up right now, because I know something's going to happen. It's not fine. Like none of this is fine to me. We talk about being traumatized. The first horror movie I remember seeing and being traumatized by, and I think it's why I feel this way to this day, is honestly Ernest Scared Stupid when I was 5 years old. My dad
wow. I could never have guessed that that's what you were going to say. Good pick, though.
My dad, I've not seen it since. My dad took us, I was 5, took us, both of my older siblings, and our neighbor, David Christie. Maybe he's listening to this. I don't know. I wonder how he's doing nowadays. But took all 4 of us to go see Ernest Scared Stupid. And David Christie and I sobbed the entire time. We were so scared. And I don't remember anything about that movie. I, honest to God, do not remember. I think I blanked it out because, like, how you can do whatever you can do psychologically to, like, forget memories. All I remember is being terrified and pissed leaving that theater.
It's weird how you perceive things as a child. Stuff just truly, like, you have no sense of what can be real and what can't be real. And, like, tone and intention of the movie, like I would imagine nobody was making Ernest Scared Stupid with the genuine intention of, like, we're going to freak people out. We're going to really shock them. We're going to shock them dead. But as a child, you just interpret it differently. And I know what that feeling is. And that's a much more, I was surprised that was what you said, but that is I would say a much healthier movie to have watched as a child than what I said, Candyman or Goosebumps. Goosebumps was a big one for me as a kid, like that, and that's that age appropriate. But I can remember I don't know why I would be stuck to the couch under the blanket, unable to move. But I would willingly sign up for that every single week. We'd go to the library and rent Goosebumps VHS tapes, and I couldn't help myself, even though I would have terrible nightmares. Why would I do that to myself?
Oh, I used to watch I loved Goosebumps. And then I remember there was one episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that gave I used to be able to watch that, but there was one that gave me nightmares, and it was the one where the teacher had, like, a sorcerer's staff and was like I don't know, and, like, there was something about the pool, but whatever was going on in that one, that's the one that got me. Like, it's so weird I remember these little things. So getting back into that, so horror movies, not my thing. Started watching, obviously talk about them all the time, started watching Carpenter with my husband, and he introduced me to, we finally sat down and watched The Thing, and that's where I got the appreciation for more practical effects. And now I can watch stuff like that, or I've been able to like really do like the slashers, like the Halloweens.
Hmm.
I could probably do the Jason stuff. I just haven't yet.
You'd be
But
fine.
like, yeah, like that kind of stuff I've gotten really good at. But like this side of horror, like the Shining side with like the psychological
Yes.
horror, no, thank you. Like, I refuse to watch Hereditary. That will never be on this show. I refuse to watch anything in the Conjuring franchise. Like Insidious, none of
Oh,
it. Like shit that like could actually like. I've seen The Exorcist, scares the fuck out of you because I was
yeah.
raised Catholic. Like talked about that before. Like those like, but movies like that probably I have zero intention, will never watch, and I am perfectly okay with my life being that
So,
way.
so you're saying if I picked out any of those movies, you would have said no. Well,
One
you
hundred
to
percent.
be fair, you almost said no to this, I think.
I literally asked people, like I asked my own members of my family who I also know have seen this movie and they know how I am with horror movies, what they like, how I was like, on a scale of 1 to I'm gonna die and shit my pants, where does The Shining land in like
Yeah.
horror, knowing me? And like everyone said I'd be fine, and I was fine watching it. It was still
Yep.
scary.
You're still here.
But like the shit I've heard about Hereditary, I'm good. The shit I've heard about like It Follows and the whole I slept with the light on after I saw The Ring in high school. Like this is where
The Ring's pretty scary.
exactly. It's like you can understand my level of like what I've experienced and like
Yeah.
where I kind of go with it.
It's funny that you mentioned Hereditary. I was actually, you mentioned Jessica, and I was talking to her earlier how I feel like horror movies like these, when The Shining came out initially in 1980, it was not well received
Right.
by critics. It's one of those where like over the years, the perception of it has changed completely, but it was not very well received critically. And a lot of the common critiques were, oh, it's too slow, it's so plotting, it's monotonous, and a lot of people said it's just not very scary,
Mm-hmm.
or not scary, or what is it even about? What was that movie even about? And I feel like movies like this that I would call more atmospheric horror. They're
Mm-hmm.
not really based on, even though I would classify this as a ghost story in some senses. It's not what's around the corner. It's going to jump out and get you. That's not the kind of movie this is.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of movies will always have an audience and will always be relevant and popular. And I'm not criticizing them because I love those kinds of movies too. But I feel like the more atmospheric and deliberate horror films are becoming more in vogue again now. And something like a Hereditary or a Midsommar, like Ari Aster, somebody who I think it really makes that kind of movie, or Robert Eggers, The
Mm-hmm.
Witch, The Lighthouse. I feel like those are kind of there in the same wheelhouse as a Kubrick or a Yorgos Lanthimos. I feel like this style is becoming a lot more popularized now, not maybe still with like what you would call a mainstream horror audience, although maybe it is, maybe the mainstream is changing. But when I watch this, it makes me feel a way that maybe those, I don't mean to be, I don't mean to disparage them, but I would say simpler, maybe more straightforward movies don't make me feel on a repeat
Mm-hmm.
watch. I go back and watch the classic slashers and I love them. They're great. They're classics, but they're just fun. They're dumb fun. You
Right.
know, I love Halloween. I love the Halloween series, but it's simple. It's straightforward. And that's part of the charm to it. Whereas this is like, to me, every time I watch it, I'm digesting this movie. I'm thinking really intently about the details of it. And I think it's just one of the most fascinating horror films to ever be made. And it's no surprise or coincidence that the critical perception of it has changed over the decades. But every time I see it, I'm there. I'm in that
Yeah.
hotel and I can't get out. And I was actually quite relieved when you told me you found it scary, because some people don't like that kind of movie. They don't
Mm-hmm.
like, the more patient, atmospheric horror films. And I get that too. I get that side of it. So I wondered if you would maybe think it was too slow or too boring and not scary.
Slow a little bit. I mean, it is almost 3 hours. It's like two hours
Yeah,
and 41 minutes. So,
it's definitely slow. I don't disagree with that, but
right. But I think the idea of your the whole it's all it's I think it falls under the same kind of thing as like an alien, right? the idea that you're stuck in one place and you can't go anywhere and the shit's just closing in on you. I
Mm.
think that plays into, to me, that's that claustrophobia of being stuck in one place and not being able to get out or do something or go get help. To me, that's terrifying. I would hate, like, I mean, I just went through a hurricane, like, and we were stuck,
Yeah.
like, trying to figure shit out, right? That is probably one of the scariest situations to ever be in, that for me personally. So the idea that we're stuck at this hotel because it's winter and there's no way in or out except for like one machinery that he went and he pulled shit out of, like, that is like, that right there already sets me up with like anxiety of like, oh no,
Hmm.
right? Like, what am I gonna do? And then you add on the extra, like the ghost story aspects of it and everything that goes into it. So it really did play on my anxieties because that is a fear that I have of just being stuck.
Yeah. And this movie too, I would say what helps it hold up is it's so based in humanity. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it is a, like I said, in aspects a ghost story, but Kubrick had also gone on record stating he didn't want to tell a ghost story. And that's one of the big differences between this and the novel, which I'm sure we'll reference throughout, and King's relationship with the movie
Mm-hmm.
and the history there. But you know what attracted Kubrick to this novel initially and adapting this story wasn't a haunted hotel. It wasn't spooky ghosts. It was the dynamic of what happens to a man who's innately bad, and
Right.
what if we could get close to that evil and see it up close and see what it looks like when it tries to pretend to be something else, which is also one of the big differences between this and what Stephen King had originally written. But Jack Torrance, you know, I think when you see when the movie starts off, and you know, first of all, this shit just starts, doesn't it? You hit
Right.
play, and there's no fanfare. There's no like, hey, you're
It's
about
just
to
a
watch this
car. Yeah, it's
movie.
just it. That's the other thing that's very unsettling with this movie is the sound and
Yeah,
the score. Like, I hate those high pitch, high frequency things that tend to happen that I feel like Kubrick just does. That is just like that ear piercing noise, and like the score really, really unsettling in this.
yeah. The sound design and the composition can't be overstated how great they are. I mean, they're a huge part. And when you do see that, I've still never seen this in a theater. That's definitely something I want to cross off a bucket list. But I did get to go see it. I think maybe almost 2 years ago in a drive-in. And I went with Jess, and that was the first time she saw it. And
Oh,
they
it
had it
wasn't
with
in 1996 and a giant tornado came and blew the screen off and
no. Um, but we did see it in a drive-in, and it was so it was so loud and foreboding and oppressive because we were in our car and we had the sound cranked up, and the sound that's what unnerved her the most was the sound.
yeah.
And when you can really hear it, there's so many layers to it, and it's interesting too because so little of the score is original compositions. A lot of it is when you make when it's time for a movie to be scored. When it goes off to the composer, a lot of times it'll already be cut together. You have like a loose cut with what they call a temp track, right? And
Hmm.
it's music that's placed here. Maybe it gives the right tempo or the right mood, and it's sort of an indicator to the composer. This is what we're trying to achieve to give them kind of a place to begin. And Kubrick had done that for the movie, and then they brought it off to the composer Wendy Carlos, and she scored the entire film. But there's only two compositions she made that are actually still in the movie because Kubrick then decided, actually, I like all that stuff I found so much, I'm just going to keep it in the movie. And so, and it was really, you would imagine, very upsetting to Wendy
What an
Carlos.
asshole. Like, the more we
Yeah.
talk about this and the more research I do on this, it makes me not like Kubrick as a person.
Oh, he's a mad scientist, and mad scientists like aren't known for taking the most ethical, moral high ground way to
Hmm.
get the results. It's by any means necessary, and he, I couldn't disparage anybody for having a complicated opinion of Stanley Kubrick. I mean, I do truly think he is a genius, which is not the kind of thing I would use loosely. And I don't just mean that in the fact that he was such a good filmmaker. It was like, I think he was categorically a genius who decided to make movies. And so to see the kind of movies his brain produced and what he found interesting, I think is really there's not many other directors I can think of that I would put where it's almost like you're watching a robot. Like it's like a robot is processing humanity and making this thesis on it. Like that's how hard it is for me to relate to what Kubrick's interested in sometimes. And that's why I know a lot of his movies aren't for everybody, and I get that.
Right. He's very divisive director. He's very much one of those, I've learned, where I've not met anyone that is just like, yeah, Kubrick's okay. Like people either love him and love everything he does and owns everything and like or have like specific things that they're like, this is the greatest thing of all time. Or there's people that are on the other side and that are like, I don't really like him. I haven't found something I liked by him. I don't think he's that great. I think like the common one that I come across is a lot of people say like Full Metal Jacket is a great first half of a movie, and then they leave, basic training, and then it becomes something completely different, and it's like for the longest time I never actually watched past that part and gone into the second part, and then I finally did. But he's just kind of like how this film is very divisive. I feel like people either love The Shining or you just don't care for it and could never watch it again. And a lot of that is, I think, also stems from his treatment of people on set, and when it comes to making this movie is a big one that I think has rubbed people I think like Frank was telling me that when this movie came out, it actually won 2 Razzies for director and then for lead actress with Shelley Duvall. And then many, many years later, the Razzie organization took it back because they realized how horribly she was treated on set by him.
Yeah, which is I guess a nice sentiment on their part, but if I were them, it would make me like pause and go, maybe why are we doing this ever with anybody at all?
True.
Like, do we ever know the full circumstances? Like,
True.
Not everybody is going to be Halle Berry and show up to accept the award and take it in stride. Like,
right.
I feel like the Razzies is kind of a tired institution, but yes, you're correct. They rescinded the nomination for Worst Actress because they felt it was too cruel to put that upon her. Yeah, I think. And it has to come up if you're going to have a genuine conversation about this movie. You have to talk about Shelley Duvall. That's her treatment on set. It's definitely the elephant in the room. I think I don't think you're doing. I think you're doing the movie a disservice to not talk about it. So, famously, for those who don't know, Kubrick was said to have been almost irrationally cruel to Kubrick to Duvall on the set of this film, in a way that he had singled her out. Specifically, it wasn't just he was a maniac towards everybody. It was specifically he singled her out, and now he made everybody do hundreds of takes. He was one of these guys,
right?
I don't know if it's still true, but the scene where Danny and Dick Halloran are really having that conversation about The Shine in the kitchen for the first time, at least at one point had the world record for the most takes of any film scene with dialogue. I think they shot it 148 times. And then you go, wow, I wonder why Danny Lloyd stopped acting after this movie.
How do you not? I mean, that kid had to be so traumatized just seeing everything he probably saw on set. Because you got to think about it too. 1980, or when this movie was being filmed, was probably like 79, 78. Whatever regulations that we have now, they weren't having like counselors on set and like coordinators for different, like you would nowadays. So this kid would have to go on there, act like he had a demon inside of him, and then go home and go to bed.
It is interesting. It is actually very interesting. This isn't excusing Kubrick, but apparently in contrast to how he treated Shelley Duvall, it said he was actually pretty protective over Danny Lloyd to the point where, the kid didn't even know they were shooting a horror movie the entire time of production. He was very selective about what they would tell Danny, and what selections of the script he would receive, and like when he would be directed on set. So, there's not a complete uncaringness about Kubrick.
Right.
I don't think he was a sociopath necessarily. And it is very interesting to see see interviews or hear him speak, because you get a certain mind's eye image of him when you read about how they made this film, and then when you hear him or see him, he just kind of comes across as a guy, like,
Yeah.
he's not Dr. Frankenstein or anything, but and he would drive everybody nuts with the incessant take after take after take. That's how he shot all his movies. But he drove Nicholson crazy. He drove Scatman Crothers crazy. But with Duvall, when you take into consideration what this script is asking from her, which is to be in near hysterics all day long, sunrise to sundown. I might not have the number exactly right, but the big famous scene where Jack is walking her up the stairs and she has the bat and she's just sobbing and pleading. They shot that in upwards of 120 times. And I did a lot of research into what her takeaway is of this movie after the fact. And it is interesting that I could have missed it, but I couldn't find anything where she was actually critical herself about it. I watched an old documentary that Kubrick's daughter shot behind the scenes of this film, and she interviews Shelley Duvall. Now, granted, you take a couple things into consideration. Kubrick's a very well-established, influential, powerful director at this point in his career. Shelley Duvall, I would say a famous actress by this point. I think Popeye comes out like the next year, and that's kind of like there's that, and then there's this, and she still has a career after that. But with our understanding of how power structures work in this industry, especially in the 1980s, and she's an actress and he's a director, maybe there's an intimidation factor there where you don't want to criticize him or give bad press for the movie before it comes out, like that.
Right.
That's just maybe not how it worked. But even now, there was this Hollywood Reporter article that came out, I think maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, where because she's kind of, I don't want to say falling off the grid, but she's not in the industry anymore.
Right.
It's a very private life. And, there was this terrible, like, exploitative Dr. Phil interview with her years ago. And you get the sense that, she's dealt with and dealing with a lot mentally. It's unfortunate, especially paired with the knowledge of how this film went, but they interviewed her a year or two ago. And even now her consensus seems to be that it was really difficult and she was put through a lot, but at the end of the day, it's what got the product that they delivered. And she's always, as far as I have been able to find, always stuck to the answer that it was worth it in the end. And so does that still make it right? I don't necessarily think so. And, Shelley Duvall doesn't need me to hold grudges on her behalf, but I think we can all still look back and see how she was. Her hair was falling out. She would grow physically ill. I was reading such a sad excerpt of a quote from her where she was saying, I used to walk around set listening to sad music, or I would think of sad things that happened in my life, and that's how I would get in the right headspace to cry. And then eventually I would wake up and just knowing what I was going to have to do that day, that's all it would take. I would just start to cry, and I would just be crying all day and screaming all day. And I can't imagine, know?
No,
I can't imagine.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, but like you said, it's how, from what she comes across or how she puts it out there, like it got, and Kubrick has long been gone at this point. If she wanted to come out and like trash him, she could. Now, if she's going to, you never know, right? But at the end of the day, directors are insane in most cases. Like what Kubrick was doing on actual film is what people like David Fincher are known to do now because of digital, right?
Exactly.
Like I talked about it in my episode with Lon on Zodiac. That was like one of the first movies to be done only on digital, and it was driving Robert Downey Jr. and Jake Gyllenhaal all freaking insane because of the amount of takes that David Fincher would do. So it's not an uncommon thing to happen, but it's just kind of one of those things where at the same time too is it almost is like, is Kubrick really doing it because the one that he chose is really that much different from the 146 other ones that came from it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is that 148th take really the one that was meant to be what it wanted to be, or is he just doing it because he could?
Right. I mean, that goes back to my point earlier where it's like he's got this weird analytical mind that it's, again, it's like it plugging into the matrix. It's like I can't imagine seeing the world through the lens that guy sees it, that he could watch Scatman Crothers sitting in his bed, eyes wide open towards the ceiling, and he would say, you know what, let's shoot it another 110 times because I just don't think we have it yet.
Right.
And that, which was another one. I think, he drove Scatman Crothers a little nuts. And the take they use of that, when he's sort of psychically aligned with Danny and like getting that distress signal and by the way, he was having the best damn vacation of his life. He's just sitting in this little bedroom with a bunch of pictures, framed pictures of naked
women, just boobies hanging over his
having
head.
the time of his life. And then they push in and his eyes are bloodshot and he's crying. And from my understanding, again, that wasn't just a performance on that man's part. It was like he was exhausted and his eyes were so irritated at this point because they just keep shooting him silently staring at the ceiling. But to Duvall specifically, again, I don't think you can excuse how combative he was towards her, and I understand it. What he was doing, I suppose he was trying to put her in the anxiety ridden headspace of a battered wife. He said, we're going to actually put you there to the point where you are paranoid and you are afraid of having this dialogue. And I would say if there was an agreement beforehand between the two, if Kubrick said, hey, I have this experimental idea and I want to try to put you to this place and this is what it's going to take, and do you consent to that? Right. And she said, sure, golly, let's do it. That's my Shelley Duvall impression. And they did it. That would be one thing. But, I guess maybe to Kubrick, that probably
would have been authentic, right? Like it wouldn't have been, it's like the whole thing with, in the original Friday the 13th, when they had Jason burst through the glass and grab, I think it's Corey Feldman that's standing there, like, or whoever it was that was standing there when he burst through the cabin or whatever. They didn't tell him that was going to happen. They just grabbed him and yank him out. So like the look of terror on his face is pure terror of someone busting in behind me and snatching me up. Like, things were done a lot differently. And it's one of you hate making the excuse, but at the same time, it's like, that's what it was. Right. Yeah. And while we've come a little bit further, we haven't come that far because we still have directors treating people like shit on set.
Absolutely. No, I think if you tried to do this exact same thing like today, you probably wouldn't get away with it. But if you tried to do this exact same thing 10 years ago, maybe less, I don't know. The way the industry is changing and the way that the culture looks at things like this is a little different now. And, I mean, obviously there was also no internet then, and these things were not so easily publicized. And, unless it was in a magazine or, again, a documentary you could watch or
or people would be lining up. I mean, you hear reports all the time of like how horrible David O. Russell is on set. How horrible he was to Jennifer Lawrence on literally every movie he's done with her, and making Amy Adams cry on the set of American Hustlers, I think it was, or American, whatever that one was, to the point where like Christian Bale stepped in and was like, bro, you need to sit the fuck down. Like you need to chill out. But yet he has his whole movie coming out, right? Yeah. Like people are still lining up to work with these directors, even though they're so well known for their on-set abuse, which is it blows my mind. But also it's like, I mean, what are we gonna, like, if people are gonna work with him and that's what they're gonna tolerate, then that's on them at a certain point too. It kind of feels like, but it's definitely not a practice it's been done. And it's clearly something that's, for whatever reason, is going to continue until people really start kind of not wanting to work with these people,
Right. No, that's a great example, Russell. Yeah, that's somebody who I have I have no interest in his work
Yeah.
because of, and there's some things about him beyond just his work on set, which I
Right.
don't need to detail here. But no, that's a great example that I think the tolerance for that kind of stuff just is not where it was perhaps in 1980.
Yeah.
But I don't excuse it. And if she's found peace with it, that's terrific. I hope she has. But just because she has doesn't mean others have to as well. So,
For sure.
if that was a hang up for somebody to enjoy this, I would certainly get that. But I think so much of the success of this film and it working is also in thanks to Shelley Duvall.
Right.
Unfortunately, somewhat at the expense of Shelley Duvall, but also very much to her credit as well, because basically we can kind of get, I suppose, maybe into the Stephen King of it as well. But she was Kubrick's first pick. I think basically everybody in the film was Kubrick's first pick.
Yeah.
He got who he wanted. He knew what the story was going to be and what the characters, how they needed to play on screen, and she was his first pick. And she differs a lot from Wendy in the novel, who King wrote as more of a headstrong, defiant, independent, everything that Wendy is not in this movie.
Yeah.
She's very submissive, and she's, making excuses for her abusive husband, and is very meek and afraid. And, she's like a little mouse, she disappears in the corner of the room or in the corner of the frame. And then, so King didn't want Shelley Duvall. I forget who he had recommended. I think maybe Jessica Lange or maybe Nicholson had recommended her, but Nicholson was also the big thing that drove King nuts.
Really? So let's kind of get
this.
into that part of it, because that's the other thing is Stephen King is very notorious for hating this film. Hating. Now, even before getting into that, have you read The Shining before, along with having seen it now at this point?
So, I have it.
Okay.
I've only read it once, and it was a couple of years ago. And today I sat down and just kind of went over some of the notes on the book too, to make sure some details of it were still fresh. But I did read the book after having seen the movie, and it does differ in a lot of ways, not just in story, but also in characterization, and also what I would say is the intention or meaning of the story. And I spent a lot of time really, in prep for this, I spent a lot of time reading about why Stephen King despises this movie so deeply. And I came to build a lot of empathy for why he feels the way that he did. It wasn't always something I totally got, because I love this movie. Right. And I was like, this is, I mean, I would offhand, I also would probably say, probably the greatest Stephen King adaptation, not the most accurate, but perhaps the most iconic. And King's really back in style again. Adapting his work is as huge as it's ever been, if not bigger, the biggest it's ever been. But I would say this is still maybe the most iconic adaptation of Stephen King's work in my book.
Yeah.
But so a great place to start with why Stephen King doesn't like this movie is its treatment of Jack, and it's the casting of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance. Because when King writes this book, The Shining was his third novel, and so he is a sensation by this point. That's they market this movie from the master of horror, Stephen King. So he's a whole thing already. But it was his third novel, and this movie was adapted from it real quick. I think the book came out 1977. This comes out in 1980. It's a real quick turnaround.
That's a real quick adaptation, for sure.
Yeah, and even now King writes stuff, and before it hits the shelf, it's still somebody's got the rights to it. But that's a pretty quick turnaround, especially for 1980. And it's a deeply, deeply personal book for King. He thought of it while staying at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. He and his wife at the time were staying there, and they were like one of very few guests. And it's this massive hotel, and he would spend time walking through the halls at night, and he would just describe how as soon as he was there, he just immediately knew what the entire story was. And Jack Torrance on the page is very much an analog for Stephen King himself. He's a writer struggling with writer's block who is dealing with substance abuse and alcoholism. He's an addict. Stephen King was very much an addict, especially then. In fact, I would say it probably wasn't even at its worst yet, but he was struggling with alcoholism, and he was struggling with being a father as well. He, I don't know that he ever said he was necessarily confirmed that he was necessarily ever abusive towards his children, but he would find himself harboring a lot of guilt over some of the dark thoughts that would come to him when maybe, he is trying to write and his kids need something. They're there and he just needs them to not be there. And he would think about how easy it would be to just turn around and raise your hand towards them.
Right.
He was so disturbed to know that was in him, even if he never acted on it, how easy it could be to go there. And so that's what Jack is on the page. Jack is a good guy who did bad things and is trying to reconcile them and become better. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the movie, in my opinion, and this is why he didn't like Jack Nicholson as Jack, is in the movie, he's not a good guy. He's not a good guy who did a bad thing. He's a bad guy pretending that he's something better. And from the second you see Nicholson, that's why he didn't like the casting. He's like, everybody will know immediately this guy's going to go nuts.
Right.
Everybody could tell from the first scene this guy's going to be a killer by the end of it. And he didn't like that because that's not the character he wrote. It was a slow and sad decline into madness, being overcome by these supernatural forces until that's all that's left of you. Mm-hmm. Whereas this guy's like, he's so tightly wound. As soon as you see Nicholson in that car with Wendy and Danny, and he's asking him about the Donner Party, and yeah, that's right, they ate each other. It's like he just can't. It's such a chore that he has to talk to them. You can see he just wants to tell them to shut up. He's so annoyed by them, which is a different take because Stephen King sat down and said, "Well, this feels like a mockery of what I suffered through and what I put on the page. This guy kind of is the mirror image of that." And Kubrick's movie is a lot more cynical than the book. Mm-hmm. There's room for redemption in the book. There's room for empathy. There's hope in the book. Whereas this, it's there ain't much of any of that in this movie.
Once that shit hits the fan in that last 30 minutes, that's it. Yeah. You're all done. As soon as she finds the pages of, all work and no play make Jack a dull boy, over and over again in different styles and everything, you knew, and we're all done. Yeah. He has lost his mind. I think the one thing that I have with all of it too, because kind of what you're telling me with how King wrote this book is I could understand then if he is putting himself on the page as this character, Jack, right? To have it kind of be in that sense with how the book was supposed to be to where it came from with Jack Nicholson and how he portrayed the character. It's kind of going back into that whole idea of a mockery of what I went through and what I've done. Cause this is my life. It sounds like it's almost in a way semi-autobiographical.
For sure.
And someone is now taking that and just spitting it out and acting like none of that ever even mattered. All that matters is I'm going to get this guy to go crazy and he's going to give one of the best performances of his whole entire life because Nicholson kills it. Right?
Oh, he's terrific.
It's an iconic performance. That's going to be something that will stick with you for the rest of your life once you watch this movie. But it's not the story that King obviously had written and had in mind, if that's where it was going.
Yeah, Jack Torrance in the book, I would say is King going, what if the worst parts of me became true? Mm-hmm. How would I reconcile with that? And I feel like Kubrick's version is that same character, but goes, oh, those aren't the worst parts of you. That's just who you are.
Right.
You are an addict. You are an abuser. You're a monster, and you don't feel bad about it at all. Mm-hmm. And if somebody could just give you enough of an excuse to do it, you would go off the deep end and never look back. And that's what Jack is at the end of this movie.
Right.
Because in the book spoilers, if anybody's concerned about that.
1977.
Book spoilers. But in the book at the end, it's not that Jack goes crazy. It's that his body is possessed by the souls of the Overlook. And that is what's chasing Danny and Wendy through the hotel. And he even momentarily redeems himself in the book. Jack's able to fight off that influence long enough for them to escape so that he can destroy the hotel, and he goes down with it. Whereas in this, that you're seeing the real Jack Torrance at the end of this. Finally, I can drop this facade and I can get these two to just shut up and leave me alone so I can complete my masterpiece, because these are the two that are holding me back and taking my time and my attention. It's the writer's block excuses. You just tell it, and I can relate to that in a way, because I fancy myself somewhat of a writer. When you get that block, when it's difficult, first of all, it's very embarrassing, and you can see Jack be embarrassed in this movie, like when Wendy he's sitting at the table and maybe you could read me some later, and you can he gets so irritated because he knows he doesn't have anything, and he doesn't want to have to admit that to her, because then he has to confront it. And when you have that writer's block, it's so easy to explain away why it's like that. Well, I just have to work all the time, or I gotta clean the house. If I don't clean the house, but when I'm done cleaning the house, I'm gonna write. I'm gonna write. And then when you're done cleaning the house, you come up with another reason not to write, because deep down you're not writing because you got nothing, and it's embarrassing. And and again, King, writer, big shock. So you can see him working through, I think, a lot of those emotions and those demons. And he was somebody who did also very much struggle with alcoholism and addiction, which he really saw as the true dangers and demons in his book, along with the supernatural stuff, because it is Stephen King. And the book's even crazier in terms of the supernatural. There's a lot of stuff that didn't make it to the movie, but that's what Kubrick is not interested in. He was very public about, like, almost sort of diminutive of King's book. So I could also see why Stephen King felt disrespected, because he was like, oh, that's a ghost story. That's silly. Kubrick didn't believe in the supernatural. He was very practical. He didn't believe in an afterlife. He didn't believe in fate or any of this kind of stuff. He was very analytical and practical. He wanted to tell a story about the human psyche. And he doesn't even think of this as a ghost story, which I think is interesting, because I think there's inarguably something supernatural still happening in his movie.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you go into the ending of the movie where after you see Jack frozen outside, and then it's going back into the hotel, and then it goes straight to that picture from 1920, and it's him in the picture. And so now you have that whole idea of, like, shit being open to interpretation of, like, was he, reincarnated, or is
you've always been the caretaker, Mr. Torrance?
Exactly. Yeah. Real quick though, I just need to, like, I was in a group chat, and when we got to that whole scene in the bathroom and they dropped that one word that we really should not say, and they drop it very loosely multiple times. Like, I didn't hear it the first time, so let me repeat it. And then you get the answer back. So then you repeat it again, and then you get to hear it again.
I always forget that they use, they drop the N-bomb. They use that slur in this movie.
Real loose with it, real quick. Like,
I always forget. I agree. It always catches you by the, you sit up when you hear it. You go, whoa.
You sure do.
Whoa. But this is something I've talked about a lot recently too, because I find a lot of modern audiences seem to struggle with this. And I do think this is the case here. I don't think depiction is not always endorsement. You know what I mean? These are two terrible people referring to a very good man in a terrible way. Yes. You're not supposed to go, oh yeah, that's right. It's just another thing on the list. It's
meant to make you be uncomfortable. I'm like, this guy is insane. Like, there's something not right about him. But man, it hits you real quick. As soon as that word comes out, you're just like, oh, okay.
And he's talking to a ghost from the 1920s, so it's like, that is probably how he would talk. Unfortunately,
For real.
You brought it up, and I want to ask too, because I sit and think about this every time I watch it, and I thought about it even a little deeper this time. But I would love to hear what you think that final photo at the end really means. What is the implication of it?
I mean, that to me is where the idea of, like, the ghost story comes into, and that he's on this, or like the psychological, like the supernatural, that he's on this constant loop, that he comes back to his life. However, whether it's reincarnation or a spirit or whatever, he always comes back at this hotel.
Right.
And he's
Yeah.
gonna be the caretaker, and the cycle is just gonna start all over again, is kind of how I interpret it.
Mhm.
Or that it's like a generational thing, like his father before him, and like, or like whatever it is, like somehow there's some sort of tie-in in that sense.
Yeah, it's some sort of weird honeypot that continues to pull your soul back in,
Yeah.
maybe over and over again. I've never landed on a completely satisfying answer to this. It like really is the question I can't answer every time I watch it. And there's also that conversation he has with Danny where he asks him, do you like it here? I
Mm-hmm.
love it here. I feel like I've been here before, but it's not like deja vu, but I feel like I've been
Yeah.
here before. And yeah, I know I still don't fully know what that means. Is it reincarnation? Was he here in a past life? Is he doomed to come back here and die over and over
Mm-hmm.
again? Because down to a spiritual level, he himself is just so irredeemable and evil that this is where it's always going to go.
Yeah.
Something I literally didn't notice until this time I watched it. And maybe it's because I had the subtitles on, which I don't think I've ever watched this with subtitles, is at the beginning when Ullman's telling Jack about the Overlook and its history. He tells him about Charles Grady and his, killed his daughters with an axe and then himself. And then, he sees Grady later in the bathroom.
Right.
But Grady doesn't call himself Charles Grady. He calls himself Delbert Grady.
Mm-hmm.
So the last name is all it takes for us to go, okay, I know who this is. But this time I went, wait a minute, it's two different names. So is there an implication that Delbert Grady is somebody from the 1920s and Charles Grady is somebody who died in the 70s? Like,
Right.
what again, that feels connected to me, that people keep coming back here in this loop and dying and killing, and the hotel becomes even more and more powerful because as Dick Halloran says, like even some places can shine too, and this
Right.
place shines very brightly. And Danny's like it's like all the ghosts are frequencies, and Danny's is a AM FM radio, and when he gets in there, they just sing so loud, much louder than they do on their own. Because you got to imagine the day to day of this place
Right.
is not that crazy and exciting,
Right.
or nobody would ever stay there. So they're
absolutely right. That's the whole thing, and it's all of these things come out when everyone's gone, right? Yeah. There's not people talking about like weird things happening at the Overlook, throughout in season time. It's when everyone's gone and there's just a caretaker there, doing caretaker shit, I guess. Kind of getting into like more details with like your feelings on the film and everything. If you had to list your like top 3 moments from this movie, what would they be? Any order doesn't matter, but like what 3 parts are like your biggest standouts with it?
Oh goodness, what a question. I mean, the first one that comes to mind, I would love to list it last because it's the most obvious, but you have to, I can't avoid it, is of course room 237.
Sure.
Everything that happens in 237. Again, you mentioned it, the sound in that, where all it is as Jack slowly walks into that room, and you've been hearing the entire movie, don't go in that room.
Right.
Don't go in that room. And then you also have the setup of like, there's a crazy woman in there that strangled our son, which is like, what? Because you don't see any of that. You're
right.
Like, what's going on? So you still don't really know what you can expect to see. And the sound it all drops out, and it's just that bass. It's just this entrancing bass over and over again as he so slowly walks in the room and the curtain slowly gets pulled back. Again, it's so deliberate. The pacing is so strange.
Right.
And so, I would say just so different than how you would conventionally make any movie. It's like long stretches, and then boom, jump cut, and it's 4 months later, and it's like, what happened to those 4 months?
Right. Where do we go? What do we do?
Yeah. It's nothing interesting happened then. Okay. It's all over that scene though, is just the pacing of it is so masterful and so tense. And it's all you can do to even breathe when you watch it.
Right.
And then finally the release of him, which also, again, you get more of a realistic depiction of what Jack's like, because he is going up there to confront a woman who tried to kill his son. And then he's like, oh wait, but she's hot.
And she's naked. And
I
she's
think I'm gonna kiss her.
Me. Yeah.
instead of even bring that up, I think I'm gonna kiss her.
Yeah.
And and then finally the pull away and reveal that she's this horrific, dead, rotting corpse woman is just the best. That's the whole movie. And like
gave me some real good Barbarian vibes there for a second. Sorry, spoilers on that one. But
yeah, a little. I know what you mean.
Old boobies.
I know what you mean. That's terrific. I mean, again, when he's unfortunately, considering everything we said about this earlier, but the great scene of Jack so menacingly following Wendy up the steps.
Yeah.
And I mean, she's hardly person at this point. She is just pure hysterics on legs. And she can barely put thoughts or words together. And you just get this, but you get to see Nicholson just
doing exactly what he got known for. I mean, the line where he's like, you didn't let me finish. I said, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to bash your fucking brains in. Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, the way that he does it is just, it's horrifying.
The choices that he makes, the way he enunciates certain syllables, and his speech patterns are they're not correct.
Right.
He's almost animalistic in that scene. It's just so legendary. And then got to pick a third. It's hard. It's such a thing to reckon with, to try to pick three things out. But the next one that comes to mind, and it's Nicholson. Not to give him all the trophies for this, but it's him and Lloyd at the bar. I think maybe, I don't know if I like this, probably the first time a little bit more, but and again, you still don't have any heads or tails of what the hell's going on in this place. But that there's a bartender there, and that it's suddenly stocked with liquor, even though we very poignantly established there's none left.
Because of insurance reasons. Makes the insurance cheaper.
Because, every 10 years there's a murder-suicide here.
Sure.
So we want to try to break that cycle.
100%.
Unfortunately, didn't happen at this time either. But, again, it forces you to ask so many questions in that moment, because now one of your characters is having a dialogue with the ghosts that you were pretty sure were there. You've seen the twins at this point.
Right.
Danny's seeing things, but now somebody else is seeing things, and he's talking to Lloyd at the bar, and he's drinking, and how significant it is that he's taking that drink. And, you're like, okay, is he actually drinking, or is he just unlocking that door psychologically?
Right.
No, there's no whiskey in the glass, but mentally, psychologically, he's accepted that drink. And what does that mean now that he's past that line? He's crossed that line once again. What else is he going to allow himself to do? I just think that's such an important scene. And because of the questions it makes you ask, you're like, what kind of movie is this? What kind of story is this? What is real? Are they ghosts? Are they manifestations of their own, trauma and psychological baggage? And maybe it's two of those things. Maybe it's none of those things. And that's when suddenly you are on the ride that these characters are on. And I've seen so many theories about, it's all in Wendy's head, and it's all in Danny's head. No, it's all in Jack's head. And I think some people, you'd be surprised to hear this coming from me, I think some people overanalyze The Shining.
I think I feel like that's kind of people who are, again, going back to like the idea, the people that are like big Kubrick fans, overanalyze everything that he does. Like they always, and again, I think that comes back to like that idea of like the evil genius that Kubrick kind of is with how he does things. And like, it could literally just be, he just made The Shining and he wanted to fuck with people, and this is what came out of it. And there's no other rhyme or reason to why he did what he did. Right. Like, and that's kind of like the genius part of it is this is a movie that if people really want to break down who Kubrick was as a director, we can find all these little nuances and try to like, find like the hidden meaning in the Taylor Swift song for The Shining, right?
The Shining Taylor's version.
The 4-hour Taylor's version of The Shining.
No, it is a weird litmus test for people. There's an entire documentary about what people think this movie's about called Room 237, and it's terrible. It's embarrassing. The things people come up with so little basis in reality, and having so little supporting evidence from the film. It's like I can't believe somebody let them make a movie about this. And in theory, they'll be like, well, it's actually about, you know, the indigenous native genocide as a result of American colonialism because of all the native art and art, you know, design and decoration, and they say it's on an Indian burial ground. And it's like, okay, I feel like, again, I think Kubrick's purposely putting something there, but I don't know if it's what it's about. And then some people think it's a weird confession from Kubrick that he directed the fake moon landing. That's a whole rabbit hole you can go on your own time.
The fake moon landing is one of my favorite conspiracy theories of all time.
Yeah, there's a popular subset of that theory that people think Kubrick directed the moon landing.
And that's, you know, it's so funny because I know people, honestly, even my husband said, do I think we went to the moon in 1969? No. Do I think we've been there since then? Absolutely. And like we've seen footage from that. But he's like, you're telling me we had the technology in 1969 to fly to the moon?
I don't know. You see 2001: A Space Odyssey? We made it. we can make it look like we did. Kubrick knew.
Exactly.
He knew. And then people think, oh, well, Danny's wearing an Apollo sweater in one scene, and that's or because in the book, this is the one I just learned this part today. In the book, it's room 217, and he changed it to 237 because the moon is 237,000 miles away. Man,
Jesus Christ! What? Those are the type of people that literally, I'm like, you know, what's a really good thing to do every once in a while? Go outside.
You touch grass, right?
Sunshine, feeling sunshine on your face makes you feel good. Like it's okay.
I think this is such a terrific and layered movie, and I think there is so much to digest and interpret, but I don't think it has to be to that degree.
Right.
And I think people are almost giving Kubrick, you know, well, I definitely think they're giving Kubrick a little too much credit, or they're also giving him not enough, in that they're, you know, he was saying something with this and he was crafting the story that was interesting to him, and they won't let it be a very good horror movie. Instead, it has to be this weird, subversive, subconscious, subliminal confession.
What a choice for that. Like, if you're gonna go with like subliminal messages, like dig deep into the fucking Doctor Strangelove. Like that one is literally a satire of the times of during the Cold War and everything. If you're gonna try to dig, go dig in there. Like that would be, I feel like that would be more of a rabbit hole for these kinds of things than
Now,
Shining.
Just to somewhat their credit, I guess there's some reality in the fictitious world they inhabit, because Kubrick was, in actuality, he was very fascinated with subliminal messaging. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've had any time to dig into this or if any of it stuck out to you, but the Overlook itself in this movie is like an impossible space that can't exist. I don't know if you came across any of this. It's very interesting, and I every time I watch it, I look out for these little weird things. So the film is actually littered with continuity errors, mm-hmm. but based on what we had here, you know, what we talked about, this is a guy who will shoot, you know, a shot reverse shot dialogue scene 148 times.
Right.
This is not a guy who makes continuity errors, right? You shoot a scene hundreds of times, you're going to notice that the chair in the background is different in the back 70 takes than it is in the first 70 takes. And even if you didn't notice, you got 148 takes. I bet you can find two that work together.
Right.
But in the background, furniture moves or it disappears. A famous one is when Danny and Dick are talking for the first time, a light switch on the wall disappears. Jack's typewriter changes color 3 times. The biggest, what I think is the most interesting, you get so many of these wonderful Steadicam shots. You basically go on multiple tours of the hotel. It really feels like they're waving it in your face how this hotel is constructed, what the layout is. They want you to take inventory of it so that later you may not even realize it, but you start to notice that the hotel doesn't make any sense at all. Ullman's office, again, the first scene where Jack comes there and talks to who would become his boss, Ullman's office. You first get this tracking shot of Nicholson walking through the hotel, and he gets to the office, which is smack dab in the middle of the building.
Right.
So it can only be surrounded by hallways. He gets into Ullman's office, and what's there? A window behind his desk, looking outside. And this was not shot on location. This was all sets. So the window is not there unless they built the window and piped light in through it.
Right.
There's no way that it could be a window in this guy's office looking outside. It's in the middle of the building.
Right.
And it's something you don't even register the first time. Or when Danny's, there's a couple instances of this, but Danny will be going down he'll turn a corner, right? He'll go down the hall and it's hotel door, all these rooms. And then he'll turn the next corner and it's just balcony. There's nothing behind the wall. So these doors don't go anywhere. If you opened one, it would be nothing. There could not be a room to go in there.
Right.
There's also, and I'm doing it. You can watch, you can look at the blueprints and everything. There's so much material about this, but the hotel itself, I like to think of it as almost, it is like almost an organic being itself, and it's shifting and it's moving and it's transforming and it has no static state anymore. It's, it is this weird non-corporeal space. And I think that is so creepy, and it is deliberate on Kubrick's part that even just down to the blueprints of the hotel are scary.
Yeah.
Everything in the movie is informed by, I want to scare you.
Right.
And that's his mad genius mind at work. Nothing cannot be informed by the fact that he's making a horror movie, because he doesn't really make one like this ever again.
Right.
I think all his movies have elements of horror in them. I think Space Odyssey does. I think Eyes Wide Shut certainly does. Full Metal Jacket does. I think all his movies do. Clockwork Orange. But this is the most definitive front to back horror movie, and goddamn, did he make it count?
For sure. And it's like, it's almost as if I love when movies have their scenery or their location is its own character as well. And the hotel in this film is a character, right? Like, it has a story. It has depth to it. It has, like, there is no story without what's happened within that hotel and within those walls. And so I think he does a really good job in bringing that aspect to it as well, for sure. Going back to, like, we're talking about the top three, I definitely would have to, I agree with probably one of the top moments being that scene with him walking up on Shelley Duvall on the steps. I'm also a big fan of the scene where we were talking about, where she brings him lunch and she's trying to talk to him about what he's writing. And because I think in that moment, that's kind of one of the real first moments where, because she'd already had the conversation with the doctor about, like, how he accidentally dislocated, Danny's shoulder and all of these things. And so you're like, is he redeemed? Is he not? But, like, that to me was one of the first moments when that scene happened that I'm just like, oh, he's not okay. Like, shit's gonna go down. By the way, like, he turns and looks at her and tells her to fuck off. Like, I'm just like, oh, okay, that just happened. And it sets up a lot of unease. It's hard to go into this movie blind, right? Like, the pop culture references for The Shining have been there. Like, I've known about the twins. I've known about the, here's Johnny, like, all of these super iconic things. So I think that kind of, that can lean towards, like, the not scary, because I know it's coming, but the anxiety of building up to when it's coming and what does it mean? Because I knew about the girls, but I didn't know what they were going to do. And then they were there and then they weren't there anymore. And that was it. Like, we just know that they haunt the hotel. Like, who are they fucking with? Like, what's going on? Right? Like, so there's so much that gets, I guess the kind of way, like, there's so much that gets introduced, but you don't get a payoff with. They're kind of just there. Yeah. And I think that might be, maybe, other than, like, the other things we've talked about history-wise with it, but, like, I think that kind of stuff with food, that's one of my biggest pet peeves about this, is, like, something gets introduced and then we never see it again.
Oh, I love that aspect of
it. Of course you would.
But I agree, because there's never a part anywhere in the movie where, somebody shows up and they say, oh, let me just tie this up with a bow. And now that the movie's almost over, you will have understood what you just saw. So much of it is you don't get anybody's take on it. You don't get anybody's reaction to it, maybe except for Shelley Duvall screaming through the hallway, right. Hey, turn a corner. This guy's in a bear costume blowing another guy. What's that all about? And we're on to the next thing.
Right, we're on to the next.
Nobody ever said anything that would make you believe that, like, you don't see that image and go, oh, that's that. Like, it never came up before that, never comes up after that.
Yeah.
You just again, the woman in the bathtub, what's her deal? She's not, we only get the one ghost story that happened here, which was Charles Grady. He was the caretaker. He went nuts, killed his kids, killed himself. That's the one story you get. But you get all these glimpses of all these other terrible things that must have happened here. And again, it's like this weird Venus flytrap for darkness, just bringing in all these wayward souls and I guess, destroying, any sort of restraint and just letting them give into their worst inhibitions. And you get the sense that a lot of people died here. I don't know. That old lady maybe drowned in the tub. What was her deal? I don't know.
And then is that the basis with Dr. Sleep? Because I haven't seen Dr. Sleep, but I hear a lot about it and how it's like the more beloved sequel to.
Some people do like it more than this. I wouldn't go this far, though. I'll tell you who does like it a lot more than The Shining is Stephen King. Mm-hmm. Stephen King has even gone as far to say as he enjoys Dr. Sleep so much that it's kind of reconciled a lot of his hangups about this movie. And I won't give you too much of the hard details on Dr. Sleep because I think you should watch it. And also I would say if you survived this movie, I think you'll be able to handle Dr. Sleep. It's a radically different movie.
And we'll just bring you back on, so I'll keep making everybody else upset that have been trying to come on the show.
I would love to come back and do Dr. Sleep, which is another good reason to not get too deep into it now. But it's a very different movie and a very different story. And it's not as scary as this, which I don't mean as a critique. I don't think it's trying to be. It's just very different in intention and what it's doing. But it does this amazing magic trick of still being a sequel to this because and King was very adamant that they not do this, and Mike Flanagan had to sell him on it. But he said, I'll only let you make Dr. Sleep if you don't show that fucking hotel. We're not going to the Overlook. I don't want any of Kubrick's movie in it. I don't want to see that carpet, which is the most iconic movie carpet of all time.
Right.
I don't want to see any of that. And Flanagan was like, we just can't not do that. It's, you're going to do a sequel to The Shining. We
have to go to where we're going.
Do those things. We can't not do them. And Flanagan came up with some very creative rewrites of King's book, Dr. Sleep, to sort of canonize both the book and the movie as two things that could exist simultaneously together, even though what King was saying and what Kubrick was saying are so polar opposite. Dr. Sleep is this amazing thing while also being a very good movie where it sequelizes both of them at the same time. And it's amazing that it works. And I just rewatched it today because I wanted it to be fresh for this. And after I watched The Shining, I was like, I just got to go watch.
Got to go watch the other one for sure.
Yeah, it's just so in my head right now, and it is terrific. And I think you should watch it. I won't spoil anything for it, but I think you knowing everything you know about this movie and about not just the movie itself, but the lore behind it and the production of it and King's feelings on it, I think you will find Dr. Sleep to be a very fascinating experience, and it is just on its own a great movie. It's a real shame it didn't do very well. Nobody really saw it.
Right.
I think they also did a terrible job when they were marketing it, explaining to audiences, this is The Shining 2. They didn't they didn't do that.
Right.
And they didn't call it The Shining 2 Dr. Sleep. Like I think maybe that would have been necessary. So it's a shame.
Or done some sort of tie-in with it. Because I wouldn't have known that's what it was without other people mentioning it to me.
Right.
So
yeah, I think they really failed because there was other stuff Flanagan wanted to do too. He wanted to do a Dick Halloran movie, and now J.J. Abrams is developing something about the Overlook Hotel that's getting shopped around. So there'll be more takes on this to come. We didn't even get into the fact that Stephen King greenlit an entire miniseries in the 90s just because he hated this movie so much.
Oh, that's right. I did. Yes. I saw that right here on my Wikipedia page.
Yeah. That exists solely because he hates this movie so much. He just wanted to see somebody do his novel correctly. And he was very hands-on. And I've actually not seen the miniseries. I wanted to try to watch it before this, but it's not the easiest thing to find, unfortunately. But it's as I understand, a much more literal adaptation of his book, and it's down to the casting, the characterization's a lot similar, and it was shot at the Stanley Hotel on location where King wrote, not that where he wrote this book, but where he was inspired by this book. So I imagine it was very therapeutic for him to do it, and seems to have a pretty good reception, surprisingly, just because how hard is it to do this again when you have such tall shoulders to stand on? But
yeah,
The Shining, it's somebody else will probably come and try to do this again someday. And
I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, it's in the time of remakes and reboots and legacy sequels, and it's hard to not see someone doing this again at some point and trying to put a new spin on it. But that's the whole thing, is will Stephen King allow it, right? Like if his works are not public domain yet, is there someone where we've already heard, like you said, he was really opposed to Flanagan taking Dr. Sleep. Like, would he be interested in someone even trying to do it again?
Right. I mean, I wonder if he would be a little more protective about this one. Maybe in a world where Dr. Sleep doesn't exist, maybe he would love to see somebody else try, because even if it was a great miniseries, a miniseries isn't a movie, right? It is a different kind of thing. But because I think maybe he's exercised those demons of, I just fucking hate what they did with my book, all these decades, somebody came along and was able to rework that in a way where he felt good. I mean, that's crazy too, to take, old men are stubborn. So to get somebody like that, Stephen King, who is, who's had decades to stew in that and be able to come up with something that would change his mind and his feelings is pretty powerful. I recommend, even if you don't have me back to talk about Dr. Sleep, you don't have to do that, but I would do it. But you should just watch it. I'm
going to get a text from friend of the show, Chris Anthony Lopez, going, "Oh, you're already planning on having Taylor back on, and I haven't been on yet."
Yeah, just keep me coming back.
So they keep interchanging you and Moose Haas and just piss everybody else off.
That sounds like the greatest podcast of all time, if you ask me. I don't think you can lose with that lineup.
Winner every time there.
Yeah. Sprinkling some Brother Lomas in there.
There we go. Exactly. It's perfect. Well, kind of with all that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and get into my letterbox, because that's how we like to end everything, is I'll give, my out of 5-star ratings for each movie that I watch. And for this one, personally, I don't think I'd really go back and watch it again.
Oh,
it's not my favorite, I think, but I also think the reason why it's not my favorite, I think Jack Nicholson is amazing in this movie, and I get why he gets all the flowers for everything he did, but this is one that I have a hard time taking, like, the making of stuff out of the equation with. Just because knowing how horribly Shelley Duvall was treated, and then now knowing that and watching the movie, seeing like her tears are actually real tears, like she's like, fuck this shit. Like, I'm so over it. Yeah. It kind of definitely takes it down a few for me. But with that all being said, I still think it is, I don't think it's a terrible film. I get why people love it, and I would never, narc on people for loving it. So I'm kind of very in the middle of the road with it. I'd give it 3 out of 5 stars, personally.
3?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're breaking my heart.
I'm so sorry.
3.
I'm so sorry.
Well, like I said at the top, I don't necessarily disparage people who this wasn't their thing, because I kind of get it in the same way that I get Kubrick's not people's thing, and I get that horror as an entire genre is not necessarily everybody's thing. I understand that this is kind of a tall drink of water, this movie. And not everybody's going to be in the mood to sit down and just watch this willy-nilly.
It's an event. Like, I'm not one of those people. When I sit down and watch a movie, I can't stop it. Like, I have to have the time to watch it from start to finish. Otherwise, if I have to stop it, when I go back to pick it back up, I have to start from the beginning again.
Yeah. I get that. And we mentioned her several times. Jessica was originally going to join us for this.
You're right.
I can't convince her to watch this movie again. So, you know, it's
Jessica
right
would
here
be
at home.
Jessica would be like, "You're giving it 3 stars, really?"
Yeah, she just can't find the nerve to sit down and spend time with this again. Whereas to me, it's like it's one of the all-time horror movies. It's one of my all-timers, period. But as far as like what I think is most compelling about horror and why I think I come back to it as a genre every time, I think this is, no pun intended, I was going to say, the shining example. How terrible. You just end the episode right there.
Full pun intended. Full pun.
You know, it's the shining example of what I think I love so much about horror. It's just Kubrick's fascination with you know, the grand scheme of humanity and the innate potential for the worst in us, and you know, very cynical and nihilistic, but I think still very compelling ideas. And you know, through the lens of a horror movie, I think that could be very scary. Yeah. So I think sort of the fatalist ideas he was exploring in this are really tremendous and compelling, and I could watch this movie anytime.
And I am just fine because of it.
Yeah, I'm fine. No red flags here, folks.
I'm going to text Jessica to blink twice if she needs help. And I should have asked at the top of this, but so I know, with being a Shining fan, are you also like, would you put yourself in the shoes of like a Kubrick fan as well? Like, do you just love what he does?
You know, I'm not the president of the Kubrick fan club. I would,
but you're
say
a card-carrying member.
Yeah, I'd go to the meetings. You know,
they got good coffee.
I would go to the convention, but I don't mean that in that I'm not a fan. I just, you know, some people are just, they're real Kubrick heads. Right?
Yeah,
like you said, not a lot of casual fans in that realm. I don't know that I'm informed well enough. You know, I've seen most of his films. I'm pretty familiar with his work. I know I know. I have a lot of admiration for him as an artist, but unlike this, his movies they're dense. And they're tough and they're mean. And I mean, even when you think of like Space Odyssey, which is such an iconic science fiction. Let me ask. Might be an episode. Have you seen Space Odyssey?
Space Odyssey, no, I have not. The only Kubrick films that I had seen prior to this one was Dr. Strangelove and Full Metal Jacket.
Okay. Space Odyssey is kind of the same thing where it's like this big iconic sci-fi movie and you watch it and you go, oh, that, you know, again, the pop cultural relevance, you go, that's where that comes from. That's where that comes from. But it is such a surreal and bizarre and trippy movie with nonlinear storytelling, and kind of like this, where it's like not going to slow down. And you know, people still talk about the ending of that movie and what was that all about?
Yeah,
you know, Kubrick just wasn't interested in putting it all on Front Street, and that's tough. You know, for some, and again, I don't mean that in a disparaging way, like, oh, you don't get it. It's like, no, I get why you wouldn't want to spend time with it,
right? 100%. I think that's kind of a healthy way to look at it. Is like, I get why this might not be your thing, but in the same sense, I get why that it's the same way that like Orson Welles, like there's people who love him and there's people who hate him. Like there's people who love Citizen Kane and there's people that are like, whatever, it's a movie. You know what I mean? Like but I also feel it's that way really kind of with anything. But there are some people where it's very, very diehard and everything else is wrong and this is the only right way to think about it. And I feel like Kubrick is one of those that you kind of get.
Yeah. I would definitely say I'm a Kubrick fan, but I'm a little bit more of a Stephen King fan. And so maybe there's still redemption for me yet. Maybe there's hope in that.
I'll still hang out with you, Taylor. And so before we kind of really get out of here, where can people, have you got anything to plug? Where can people find you, my friends?
Sure. Well, I mean, anybody who knows you may already know about Watt Reel Entertainment, our YouTube channel. You just wrapped up your tenure on Spin from the Reel, the final episode of our Schmodown podcast. Sad to see it go, but I'm still there. Watt Reel Entertainment on YouTube. On October 16th, my horror podcast we referenced earlier, Really Scared, will be coming back for a live discussion on Halloween Ends. We talked about so many of the Halloween movies last year, it felt only right to finish off with what will definitely be the last Halloween movie ever. No doubt. That'll be the last one they ever make. We're going to be doing a live conversation about that on our YouTube channel and our Twitch. So come and join that. And if people like it and, the response is positive, maybe we'll do some more release scares. Maybe we'll start, if you liked hearing me ramble about horror movies, let me know and come show up on the 16th because I got a lot more of it for you. Follow us on Twitch as well. WatReelEnt, that's WatReelEnt on Twitch. I've been doing a lot of game streams there. Right now I'm playing Outlast. It's spooky season. Terribly scary game. I got so stressed out the other night I quit and went to bed. So I'm playing a lot of horror games on Twitch, and I stream, once or twice a week. So I'd love if you come and join me on there. And lastly, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Taylor L. Cleek, Cleek, Taylor L. Cleek on Twitter. If you want more takes on scary movies, I got plenty of them over there too.
Love it. I love that you want people to come watch you play a game that stressed you out so much you just quit and walk away.
People love that shit.
People eat that shit up.
That's true.
And all of my friends here, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please subscribe, rate, and review Flick and Reel on whatever audio platform you're listening to us on. If you're listening on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts on The Shining. And be sure to check out and comment your thoughts on any of the other previous films discussed. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to get notifications for any time we have new content drop. And you can follow the show on Twitter at NeverSeenItFNR. You can follow me at Allison Salamone. And until next time, my friends, be safe. And I'm going to go keep watching some movies. See ya.